Greetings, good people of the Irenicast. You can literally join the conversation by signing up for Intersections. Our next cohort begins February 2022. Space is limited, and we want you to join in one of those virtual seats. Intersections is a safe, non-judgmental, and confidential space to process your journey. You may have just begun asking yourself hard questions that won't go away. You may be seasoned in deconstruction. Wherever you are on the journey, you are wanted and welcome. Conversations are facilitated by us, your Irenicast co-hosts, Bonnie, Casey, Jeff, and this is Rajiv. Our winter 2022 cohort is Thursdays, February 3 through March 10, 7 p.m. Pacific Time on Zoom. Again, space is limited, so register today on our Intersections website, The Intersections, that's one word, theintersections.space, S-P-A-C-E, or use the link in the show notes. Now, on to today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are Irenicast, a group of folks leaning into our progressive Christian imagination. I'm Jeff.
I'm Bonnie.
I'm Casey.
And this is Rajiv.
On the first and third Tuesday of every month,
We provoke conversation for shifting perspectives
on theology and culture.
Thank you for joining us, and Happy New Year to everyone listening. This is the first episode of 2022. I didn't even know if we would make it this far in history, but we did. So we have a great episode today. We have a special guest host, which we're going to get to in a minute, and we're going to be having a conversation about the best way to put it, the generational divide. And our special guest host is Selah Cluff, and she has a podcast called The Arriving, which we're going to give her a chance to talk about in just a second. And for our segment, Selah's going to quiz us on some Gen Z slang, which may prove to be embarrassing for the rest of us, or we will prove how relevant we really are in the eyes of, podcasting. So we'll see how that. But before that, I want to introduce everyone to Selah. And like I said, she is started a brand new podcast called The Arriving. And Selah, why don't you tell us a little bit about the podcast, why it's important, and a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm so honored to be here. I'm so excited for this conversation. So I'm Selah. I'm a first year at UC Davis. I study sustainable agriculture and food systems. And I just started a podcast recently titled, like Jeff said, The Arriving, a podcast for victims of experience and Gen Z. Missed the Gen Z part. The whole goal of the podcast is to kind of create a challenging, an intellectually challenging and also just challenging and nurturing space for Gen Z, and provide a bunch of resources and try and get some balls rolling in Gen Z's brains, kind of, with also like a really intense spotlight on learning from elders, listening to elders, and what they have to say. So that's kind of my podcast gist. Yeah.
And can I ask what the motivation for starting a space like this was?
Yeah, I actually was asked this for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and I had no idea what to say because I just was like, I don't know. I've never thought about that. But I think the idea started with Rajiv in the pandemic or in the quarantine. My sister and I were staying for the holidays at Bonnie and Rajiv's house, and we were just having like a sisterly conversation. It was very vivacious and full of arguing and stuff. And Rajiv, I don't know if you were being genuine, but you were like, you should just start a podcast because you talk so much and something like that. And then Abby and I were like, okay, we will start a podcast.
It was entirely heartfelt and sincere.
So then Abby and I, who's my sister, we started working on this idea. And that podcast was going to be more like very political and like talking about policies and stuff, probably because that's what was being talked about at the time. Then she didn't want to do it anymore. So I just kind of, from October 2020 to now, or till when I started it in probably around October 2021, it just was kind of always in the back of my head, and it just developed into what it is now. the motivation is, I guess, I think a lot of the conversations I'm trying to have aren't being had. And you can see that in the podcasts about Gen Z that are out there. There's only like 2 or 3 of them. And they're all like there's nothing really substantial. It's not really trying to change anything. It's just like, oh, let's talk about Gen Z fashion and let's talk to a Gen Z entrepreneur. So I guess that motivation is just like, hey, no one's doing this, so let me do it.
Just to throw some props your way, one of your recent interviews or your most recent episode is with a global expert on the environment as it relates to food.
Mm-hmm.
And she was interviewed by Oprah, the New York Times, and like you snagged her. And then like, just buzzing off of this for you, but we're both fans of John Batiste.
Oh my God, yeah.
And he tweeted, he did he mentioned your podcast and how he loves it.
No, he didn't.
What did he say?
He messaged me directly.
He messaged you.
And he said, this podcast is so awesome. And I was like, what? Oh my God, do you want to be on it?
11-time Grammy nominee this year.
That's insane.
So good. I mean,
it was crazy.
So is he going to be on your podcast? You don't know.
See.
You're waiting to see.
Yeah, I don't know.
Come on, John.
That would be like, I would probably die. I would probably pass away. It would be insane.
But you're too young to die, Selah.
Yeah, not literally. That's actually a Gen Z slang. We're already starting the segment. Yeah. That was actually my latest podcast episode was with Simran Sethi. And then obviously John Batiste. I was super jazzed about that. Let's say that. Yeah.
And for those of you listening, I know you're all, please don't leave our show yet. We definitely want you to go listen. Hey, but we will put a link to The Arriving in the show notes. And for those of you that may be, typing in right now your podcasting app, The Arriving, there's no space between those 2 words when you're searching for it. So is there a reason for that?
I was actually going to say, if you want like a little Easter egg about my podcast. So I was trying to think of a name.
A little what?
Easter egg.
Okay.
What did you think?
Is that a slang term for the quiz?
That's not even a Gen Z one. That's
really?
That's just normal
that's like decades
life.
old, Rosie.
Yeah. Disney does it all the time. It's like made by Disney, but whatever.
Okay, sorry.
Anyways.
I even knew that.
Never mind.
Anyways,
She said I knew that.
So I was trying to think of a name. I was having a really difficult time trying to finalize what name I wanted to do. And I was just trying to I guess my method for trying to figure out a name was just kind of like free association, like just thinking of words and like, okay, then we can go from there. And one of the words I thought of was thriving, which is, it's also so many Gen Z slang already, but it's kind of like, people will say like, oh yes, like we're thriving, we're living our best life. And that's part of the goal, is to like get people to actually thrive in different aspects of life. So I was thinking like thriving, and then it was like the arriving, and that has another meaning to it. So I guess it's a double meaning, but that's why.
Nice. So when you are searching for it, make sure you don't put in that space so that you can find it, or just go to our show notes and we'll give you the link for that. Again, Selah, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to having this conversation because we have multiple generations represented already on the show, and then bringing in a new voice, I think, is going to be good. So let's start this generational divide conversation with each providing instead of our name and pronoun, we'll do our name and the generation that we have been assigned at birth. So Casey, we'll start with you since we're going to go counterclockwise.
Well, you all know me. I'm Casey, and I was born in 1986, and so I am a millennial.
I'm Rajiv. I graduated high school in 1986.
Yeah.
I was born in 1968, so I am a senior member of Gen X, the greatest generation, the real greatest generation. We're keeping it together, man.
Mm-hmm. I'm Bonnie, and I was born in 1969, so I'm always younger than Rajiv. And I guess I would also be a senior member of the Gen X tribe.
Well, I'm Selah, and I was born in 2002, so I'm kind of like right in the middle of Gen Z. So
right in the heart of it.
Right in the heart.
There you go. I'm Jeff, and I was born in 1979, and that puts me Gen X, and then in some it puts me in like the new one is Exennial, or I don't know how to pronounce it.
Mhm.
Like that middle ground between
Exennial.
millennial and Exennial. Yeah. But I more relate to Gen X, but
Yeah, you're totally
just for the
X.
sake of
Yeah.
providing some diversity, I'll go with that middle one. And then
You see, Casey just stiff arms you. He's like, "Hey, get out of my lane."
Do you hate
he's a
authority?
4. He wants to be the only millennial on the show. I'm fine with that, Casey, because I agree.
Yeah.
So I think, we had a conversation and being the first of the year, we always look towards the future. And one of the things I think we came up in our conversation off air is that the future looks differently depending upon what generation you come from. And as we think about the future, we also, rely on the past and past events. And I feel like each of our generations have had certain markers that kind of define that, whether it's historical events or even music or personalities or whatever. So to kind of get the ball rolling, what are some of the things that you feel define events that define your generation, how you grew up, how you view the world?
9/11 was a huge shift for my generation. That was in George Bush's first term. And, the arriving of the internet, right? Like dial-up computers and homes actually having access to the internet, I think is something that my generation we sort of received in that way. And so I think those are defining markers. Barack Obama, right? I mean, these are all things that we grew up in this time of the internet sort of arriving in homes, 9/11, and a shift, I think.
I think from my experience as a Gen X person, we were kids near the end of the Cold War. And so we still, it was waning for sure, but we still have the experience of being really vividly aware that there were enough nuclear bombs to destroy the earth 7 times over. By now, it's probably 20 times. Who knows? We don't know what's going on. And then always feeling that could happen to us at any moment. We could just be annihilated. I think some Gen X, whatever you call it, what's the word for the people who study generations? But those theorists have often said that Gen X are kind of the spoiled generation, very materialistic, sort of hedonistic, all about what can I get in this moment. And for sure, I remember feeling like the mall was the place you went. That's where you dealt with all of your depression and anxiety. You just bought stuff and you used credit cards to buy stuff because our parents weren't often around, and they, many of us came from maybe 2 income households for the first time because our parents, the dad was working and the mom stayed home. And our parents, that wasn't so true. Both parents were working. So they just passed the credit card on to the kids, and the kids went to the mall. Those are the things that I remember. And then another theorist I remember said too, we were the generation that sort of brought the tattoos into more mainline acceptance, I guess. And I remember reading about one theorist who said, well, that's because we didn't go to war. And so we didn't have actual experience. So we needed the experience of having needles in our skin to have the experience of look, I'm alive. I've had experience, rather than scars that you might get in other ways, like going to war.
Yeah, except lots of soldiers got tattoos too, so.
No, I know, but I'm just saying that, the boomers went to war. They had Vietnam, and then millennials, many of them went to Iraq.
Yeah.
Gen X were sort of wedged between these 2 wars.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had hippie parents, so.
Yeah.
Or we were just rebellious. We were like,
yeah.
What did you say we can't do? Okay, then let's go do that. Thinking about milestone events. I'm a political animal, always have been. So I remember Geraldine Ferraro being the first woman nominated to the vice presidency of a major ticket. Walter Mondale being the presidential candidate, and that ticket going down in flames. They only won his home state of Minnesota, which is tragic. But I mean, seeing that moment, watching her accepting the nomination on TV was just a big deal because it was pretty exciting in my home and community. And now having the first woman vice president is kind of neat to see that happen. Also, someone who coincidentally has a Tamil mother, just like I do. And then the Challenger explosion, I remember that being like really searing like a whoa, NASA screwed up. Like, how does that happen? So that was kind of unnerving. And Bonnie talked about the Russians, basically the Cold War, and we grew up in the DC area. We did air raid drills, so that was different than a fire drill because that was like the thing in the hallway. The air raid drill was this huge siren, like in the community somewhere, and when it went off, we all dove under our desks. Like we grabbed the legs of our desks to keep them in place.
As if that was going to save you from a nuclear bomb.
We might live the blast.
Yeah, but
then you've got the radiation and whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's
everybody rolled their eyes as they dove onto their desk.
And then, our generation also created Fishbone with songs like Party at Ground Zero and stuff like that as a way to cope with that existential angst. And then also, again, back to the political animal thing, the assassination attempt on President Reagan at the time in my high school. I was in high school. No, I was in middle school. And like people being really happy about that and being conflicted. Because, I mean, there was, it was such a racist administration, and being in a minority dominant school and community, it was painful to see someone like that get elected. And then bizarre to have people actually sort of cheering an assassination attempt was very, very strange. But those are some big ones that stand out. And then the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Yeah, that was
in college. I remember hearing about it, the news breaking. I was at soccer practice, and one of our fellow players, we had this international team. One of the fellow players was from Germany, and him just like going nuts with joy. Like this guy was the most stern, kind of mean guy, and just going loopy when he heard the news. And we all huddled around cars because we didn't have phones. So we're listening on car radios.
So that's interesting, like being a later Gen Xer. Those things, like I sort of remember the Challenger explosion. I remember my second grade teacher crying, and then they, showed the explosion and stuff like that.
They showed you the explosion?
Yeah, we were all watching it because it was like the first teacher in space. It was a
Gen
big
X baby,
deal.
Man.
It was a big deal for elementary. Like being in elementary school, they broadcast it live. Like we watched everything. Yeah. But what stands out to me is Columbine. And being a defining marker, and not only that, Columbine itself, but what Columbine started in terms of an attack on expression. Like it's the music's fault, it's video games' fault, it's movies' fault, and seeing that almost that conversation, not obviously with recent events not having really ended all that much, and Columbine being that really high profile school shooting, and an unfortunate long line of all of them, and then how that expressed to a generation. X was the anti-establishment part of it, and how threatened the establishment seemed by a lot of music and media that was coming out in the late 80s and early to mid 90s. Even the media turned the tide after that, right? So you had, like, after Columbine, you had kind of the restoring of like the bubblegum pop and the girl groups and the guy groups, and how it started being a little bit more like safe. And so I just think like that to me seems like the most significant moment in terms of defining our generation. Selah, what about you? There's lots to choose from, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's so many major defining moments that come to mind. I guess I'll start with like Trump presidency, the rise of school shootings, pandemic, the insurrection on January 6th, the advances in technology, like just social media. I think there's a lot of major defining events or major defining moments that come with social media. Now there's like little 2-year-olds are walking around and they're kind of like for-profit advertisement bags, I guess. And that's how they're seen by corporations. I'm sure I'm missing a lot. I think that maybe you were to ask other Gen Z, a lot of people would say a lot of pop culture stuff because that's really important to a lot of us. But I'm not going to go there. So there's a lot of that. And I mean, during the pandemic, there was, Black Lives Matter marches. That was really major. Anti-vax marches. And I think, I mean, like you said, Columbine. So I guess you could get even specific with school shootings and say like specific ones like Sandy Hook and one that just happened recently at Oxford High.
In Florida.
Yeah.
When I think of your generation of Gen Z, I think of those young people in Florida who stood up again to Marco Rubio in a town hall.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas.
Yeah, where those young people went to that town hall and demanded he do something.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was a moment that I was really proud of Gen Z because this question that you said earlier about nobody's doing this, so why not me?
Yeah.
I think your generation embodies that in a way that no generation has.
Totally.
Because we all suck. That's why. Because we're not doing anything.
Yeah. Let me think of
climate change.
Yeah. Oh my God. I was waiting. I was like, I'm totally going to talk about that, but I was waiting until because obviously like I'm a sustainable agriculture major. So I think about that a lot. Climate change and like the fact that we grew up 10 to 20 years away from the point where, it's irreversible. It's like we're doomed kind of thing. Yeah, it's so big. That one is so big.
I think that's a good like transition point to kind of talk about like how each of our generations viewed the future. Because, for us or for me, the future was like it was the beginning of Earth Day. So it was just kind of like if you recycle, everything's going to be fine. So there's this underlining like just general hope. Like the only thing your future you were worried about is your kids and your career. Like that to me, when I think back to being a young adult and then being in evangelical churches, it was, God's will. So those were the three things when you thought about the future. And it was generally like a hopeful thing. I don't know about everyone else's generation, but but the future was always something that was pliable. I grew up, my future guru was Doc Brown. The future's what you make it. When I watch Back to the Future, and that really stuck with me because it was always like, well, there's certain things that'll repeat itself, but if you're mindful and you move forward. So I mean, I want to go straight to you, Selah.
Yeah.
How does that contrast to how you feel like a good portion of your generation view the future?
I think the simple way to say it is we view it with like no hope at all. We just view it for how it is. A lot of us that are actually thinking about like what our kids' futures will be like, we're wondering if we're even going to have kids or like career wise. There's just, I don't know, there's changes in career stuff too. A lot of Gen Z detest 9-to-5 jobs. So there's just like that, like, okay, if I don't want to do this and I don't want to work in a corporation, then how am I going to survive? But I think that's the simple way. But I think to add a little complexity, I think that Gen Z, for the most part, doesn't think about the future. And I think they numb themselves. And I think they think about what could be. They idealize so much. And it's like, and then you just get paralyzed and you can't do anything. There's no progress if you're in that mindset. And it's really lonely because you're just, like, and I think a lot of them use social media to do that. You just go on social media, numb yourself like for pretty much most of your life because it's just so hard to think about these major life decisions that you're going to have to make regarding your children or not having children or like this kind of stuff because of the future and because of how it is. That's what comes to mind.
My therapist recently was saying that social media is actually, they're beginning to classify it as self-harm.
Yeah.
Because what you are doing is you basically are finding TikToks or whatever, and you're watching someone express an emotion that you refuse to engage with.
Yeah.
Or you wish you had this life, and instead of seeking your own life, you are fantasizing about a life that is not yours.
Exactly.
And so there are therapists who are now classifying some people's relationship to social media as self-harm.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So when you say that,
yeah.
That there is this numbing effect, I hear that.
And research has proven that.
Sure.
Yeah. And I also think some of the hopelessness comes from feeling neglected. And I think that some of those feelings are just, maybe they're just because we're at this age and we're already being like, oh, I'm so alone. Like no one cares about me. So if you have those, like in adolescence, I guess, with social media, it's so different. And then there's also like, you look at the world and you look at these companies and like I keep saying corporations, but you look at these corporations and how they like blatantly don't care about you. And they're just using you to make money. And they know that they're harming Generation Z, but they don't care. So there's that. And then there's also like, you're looking at your parents and you're like all the people that are adults in your life. And you're like, why didn't you do anything about the climate crisis? I think Gen Z has to reckon with so many feelings and so much anger and just sadness and grief to actually live their lives. And they just rather not because maybe they don't have the tools or whatever. But I think so many are just like in a paralysis of existence.
That is so, I don't have a word. Is there a word that is a mix between like sad and interesting? Like I feel like I wonder when you say like that isolation is part of that a feeling of being dismissed or not having a place where your voice is taken seriously
or
in
abandoned.
our cultural context.
Yeah, I think all of the
abandoned by. I mean, I want to just say, like, as a member of Gen X, that you're right. I mean, to me, those feelings feel really valid because it's true. It's coming from a place of truth that Gen Z has been given over to climate crisis and to corporatism. And it's like, I can't think of anything more heart-wrenching, honestly. And I think that your generation is owed a huge apology, and not just an apology in a sense of like, we're so sorry, but also like there's some restorative justice that needs to happen.
Yeah.
That the previous generations, anyone who's older than a Gen Z person, needs to make this right.
Yeah.
Because if there's anything that we need to be about together collectively, it's bringing up our young people.
Exactly.
And that didn't happen in the way that it should have.
Yeah.
And it's not happening because you're on where are you? You're like smack in the middle.
Yep.
So about half of the generation is younger than you. They're in high school and maybe even older middle school.
Yeah.
They're still coming up.
Yeah. And I also want to mention really quick that the alternative to, just accepting whatever and just like being in that paralysis state, the alternative to that is like, I don't know, you could, for example, like you could talk about Greta Thunberg. Like she's working so hard and she's amazing. But the way I see it, like she's doing great work, but there's a robbery there of her childhood. And like people should be doing that for her. And there's like the responsibility. I mean, I hate it because like I actually was just watching this ad, like, I don't know, I was watching Hulu or something. And there was this advertisement with this little kid, like 4 years old, saying like a motivational speech. And it was like an Amazon ad. And I got really mad at that because there's so much of that. And I'm like, why are you forcing this little kid to tell you this and say, oh, this is so inspirational when you need to be doing that to them? Like, then they're going to grow up and be like, these are just words because they were never reciprocated. So they don't mean anything. So I think that we say, oh, these Gen Z heroes are like so inspirational, but there's also just such a loss there. And it feels really dismissive for elders to just say that and just be like, oh, you're so great. Yeah.
Well, the truth is there are very few elders. I mean, that's the fact. There are a lot of people who are older, but they are not elders, right? And I think that that's the thing that your generation is looking around. That's why I wrote this down and said it earlier, Selah, that I feel like it is in the nature of Gen Z to say, well, nobody else is doing this.
Yeah.
Gun control, climate change, Black Lives Matter. I mean, all of these things. Nobody else is doing this, so I guess I'll have to do it. Right? I mean, and you shouldn't have to. There should have been elders and adults who would forsake their profit for the sake of saving the world and chose profit over people, right? And a variety of other things. But I think that that is something that I both feel bad, like Bonnie was saying. I feel sad about that. And I admire about your generation, because if there's anybody who's actually going to save the damn world, it might be Gen Z, because you have to, for the sake of your own future, as we're talking about, because otherwise you may not have one. And that is sad as hell.
I'm not obviously a, whatever generational scholar or anything like that, but I'm listening to this conversation. I'm talking, and first of all, it's so important for those of us that are not in Gen Z to hear that compliments can be dismissive, right? Like to say to someone, you can change the future, that you're actually transferring a burden and a responsibility that you had. And when I look at, and again, this is anecdotal, so feel free, listeners or anyone here at this table, to push back at me. In my experience, the growth of our country, our culture, was stunted by the boomer generation. Because number one, the wealth disparity that's been hoarded by that particular generation, and the power disparity in terms of how many people we have in power that are still in that generation, or even later Gen X, and again, wherever that line is. And then also this perceived, and going to a little bit, Casey, what you were saying, this perceived, I don't know, it reminds me of like a kingdom, or, the Pope kiss my ring kind of thing, where it's like, we're the kids of the greatest generation. We have all the wealth. We have this power. So, kiss my ring. And, you should, this younger generation, they don't understand. And they almost project their entitlement onto every generation below them. And I feel like to a certain extent, Gen X was abandoned because, we were the latchkey generation, right? Like we were abandoned economically because our parents had to work and we were just kind of there to fend for ourselves and all that kind of stuff. And I think to a certain amount, the millennials were, because they were the punching bag for a decade of like everything wrong with our country, all this kind of stuff. And now Gen Z, you're having that same thing, especially with and it's a lot of times surrounded around economics. Like you were talking earlier about, Selah, you were talking about the career and job and all that kind of stuff. You got to hustle. You got to have all these income streams. And I look at it as kind of an inspiration, because it's an opportunity to kind of challenge the systems that we have, but it's also an indictment of the system that made people get into that place where they have to like hustle all these different branches.
Yeah. And to that, I really want to add, like, because you mentioned that like Xers were like kind of like latchkey kids. It's been said, I don't know who said it, but that Gen Z are like latchkey kids too, but the parents, they didn't have to go. It was by choice. They just gave them phones, gave their kids phones.
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
Was like, and then they didn't really parent them. They just let them
an iPad.
Yeah, go play on the iPad and receive all this implicit information that you'll like, it's going to stay in your brain. And at like such a formative age, it's going to change you forever, like being on social media and seeing that like, oh, my parents could have been more present, but they decided not to. And they decided just to give me a cell phone. Like there's a lot of pain in that too. Or they made me, this little kid, they made me say all this motivational stuff for views, or they or they just had me for views and did like a birth vlog. And like it's just like, you can feel so shitty when you actually start thinking about these things. And I think that's why a lot of people don't.
Part of what comes to mind initially is anybody who's listening to this that's feeling any resentment or defensiveness around stuff that Selah or the rest of us have said in defense of Gen Z, you better check yourself and do some introspection, because it is not helpful. Casey and Selah have already said our kids need to be kids. And we need to shoulder the responsibility of facing the monsters and gently guiding the kids to stand a little behind us, learn as they need to learn. But we keep pushing them out in front of us, to fight these demons, and demons that we've just fed and coddled. And until we step up and recognize that, yes, we do have a lot to learn from Gen Z, it doesn't mean we push them out front into the line of fire. We listen, we can be informed. We need to put ourselves out there to fight these battles so our kids can be kids.
Yeah.
Because without childhoods, the future is really bleak.
Yeah, and I think too that Casey said this before. Selah, somebody said we don't have I think it was you, Casey. We don't have any elders in the room, and what we have in the room, I think, are adolescents who are still bemoaning their growing up years. Like, this was so hard for us, and we're like 50. It's not a matter of getting over it, because you don't get over hard things. What you do is you go into the hard spaces, you sit there, you pay attention, you learn, you heal. And then they give you wisdom that then you can take into your becoming an elder. I got this really beautiful insight from Clarissa Estes is her name, and she's doing this series, it's on Audible, on how to become a dangerous old woman. I think I've said before, I'm in that menopause moment, so I want to know how to become a dangerous old woman.
Me too.
Yeah, it's amazing. And in that, she's describing danger, not as in dangerous in the more like common way of using the term, but in the old ancient way of using that word, which is you create a sheltering space so that the young are protected. And anyone who comes near that space of shelter, you're dangerous to.
Oh, yeah.
And then the young get to grow up under your danger. That's how the ancient word was meant to be used. Selah, I'm so glad you're here and that you're willing to be so open about your experience, because by doing so, it hopefully, it's like, it's calling those of us who are older than you, the generations that are older than you, to like become the elders.
Yep, show up.
They're in developmental theory, we're meant to not have to shoulder the full-on force of the negativity of the world until we're 35 years old.
Mm.
So the fact that you all have had to do it since you were like 10.
Yeah.
Is just so wrong.
Yeah, think about this. We literally have said to children that we would choose our guns over their lives.
Yeah.
That we would rather have police in schools and children wearing clear backpacks or bulletproof backpacks and teach our teachers how to use weapons than solve our problem. Mm-hmm. Our young people have had to live with that.
Or we want our Facebook over their mental health.
That's right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly right. And adding to that, Rajiv, something that you were saying that I think is important, a part of history that that I don't want us to walk away from that is connected to this conversation is the AIDS epidemic. And gay marriage. All of these things have happened, right? And the men who survived the AIDS epidemic struggle with this idea of sort of Neverland syndrome, that we survived, our friends died, and therefore we never have to grow up, right? And I feel like we are in a collective moment with some of that, where we think that we have had it so damn hard that we never want to grow up. And so we look at a generation of young people who are at the verge of not having a future and are having to fight for their lives, and we're saying, good on you? That does not make sense to me. And I think it's important for us to say, as you were saying, Rajiv, we have to step in, as Bonnie's inviting us to become the danger space, because the reality is, like, our bodies need to be on the line. We need to show up in spaces. Just because you post on Facebook your feelings does not mean you're doing anything. I have a friend who literally is always like, I've been fighting the good fight. I'm like, girl, I protest all the time. The only thing I see you doing is posting on Facebook. That is not how we solve problems. Like, and I think that we are in a collective moment where we have to get away from Facebook and actually show up and be present to the problem and make a solution. I think it's important.
Selah, how do you, like, speaking as Selah, and then if you can, speaking as a member of Generation Z, which I know is putting you totally on the spot. But you mentioned that, like, thrive is sort of a buzzword, or is it a buzzword?
It's, yeah.
Okay. So Selah, from Selah's wisdom place, like, what is thriving to you? And then what do you think your generation means when they say thrive? That they're thriving or whatever?
Well, it's very different. I think for me, it's maybe not a permanent state of being, but it's not like a quick moment where you're like eating an ice cream and you're like, oh, I'm thriving. Like, no, it's like, yeah, it requires work, and it requires a lot of like real self-work and acknowledgement of how things are. And then once you do that, you can say, now what can I do? And then you can thrive from there. But for Gen Z, I think the majority would say, or how it's used is like I said, it's usually used with like living my best life. And that's like going to Hawaii or something. Like, it's
Treat
very,
yourself.
yes, exactly. So it's very much like, you know, it's going to be over.
YOLO for the millennials.
Yeah.
Treat yourself.
Yes. But so yeah, that's what I would say. And I just want to add on to what Casey said previously, where you brought up that, like, you know, older people are saying like, yeah, good on you to younger people. I just want to say, like, that's kind of the best of you guys. Like, the other people say, like, you know, you're just either making this all up, or you're like, I had it so much worse. And there's a reason that the phrase "okay, boomer" was created. And I think that's it. It's just like, I don't even know what to say to you right now, because you want to talk to me about how you had to walk in the snow for like a mile to get to school.
And now there is no snow.
Now there's no snow. And there's like, now I'm having to worry about all this other stuff because you couldn't get over walking in snow. Like, it's, yeah.
Yeah, I think where I see a lot of hope is actually with some millennials and Z, in that there is a push against materialism. The whole casual dining industry is crumbling because these two generations are like, yeah, we're not doing that. You got a couple that are hanging in there, but for the most part, they're dying. I mean, a lot of the big box stores, you know, you get a few of the discount people that are still hanging in there, but and the other part, like around housing, people are sharing space. They're open to intergenerational living. There's all this cooperation, people going in on doing the food. I mean, it's just like, how much space do I need to be happy? Rather than like, I need a castle. It's like, yeah, I can live with 4 friends and make this work.
But Selah, do you think that that's out of necessity, or do you think that that's a part of your being? Because I think that honestly, my husband and I had the great fortune of buying a house, right at a time when you could still buy a house. I bet you that the percentage of Gen Z folks who own a home will be slim. And so do you think that cooperation, I mean, I do see the benefits of that, but I also wonder if that's also out of necessity.
Yeah, well, I first off want to say that I know a lot more people that don't do that than do. And I know a lot more people that are not even in that mindset. They're just totally like, yeah, I'm just going to be like, they're like not even thinking about where they want to live.
Some are in middle school.
Some are in middle school.
So-
yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I said these are millennials and Z.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is
That's I mean, I guess millennials are doing it, but and I think it is out of necessity. And I think it's also a lot of it's out of spite too. It's just like, yeah.
What I heard you say earlier, Selah, though, is that Gen Z is lonely.
Yeah. Definitely.
So that doesn't sound to me. That sounds like not really cooperation and collaborative living and all of that. That sounds like isolated. And the reason that casual dining is dying is because people are just door dashing and eating at home by themselves.
Most definitely. Yeah. And I think that, a lot of like there's an extreme. I think we're talking about one of the extreme sides of Gen Z where, there's some people that are trying to get it together. They're thinking about all this stuff. They're realizing kind of like the Greta Thunbergs of Gen Z. And then there's another extreme on the other side where people literally like play video games and are on social media for like 19 hours a day.
And live at home.
Yeah. And I know like 3 people like that. Like it's not super rare. Yeah. And live at home and they don't even know how to talk to their own family. If you look at social media, there's millions of posts where they're just like, I only see my family, make a joke about it, but they're like, I only see my family when I'm like going to get food in the kitchen. Like there's no conversations at all, let alone like good or bad ones. Just from what I know, a lot of the Gen Zs that you guys are exposed to lean towards the other extreme, like the Greta Thunbergs. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I'm not going to say that. Anyways.
I gotta say, like, I'm starting to get like the shakes a little bit over here,
I can
just
see your
because, like,
angsty.
I'm thinking, you're expressing this deep hopelessness for a generation, and my kids are like 8, and I'm thinking, like, so they're that whatever the next generation is going to be coined.
Yep.
And Generation C, it seems so final. Like, even the label that you've been given feels so hopeless, and I'm just like, gosh, what are we? And I'm wondering, like, are Gen Zs primarily parented by millennials? And if that's the case, you're talking about they only talk to their parents when they go, and earlier you're talking about giving them an iPad and all that kind of stuff, and this whole emphasis on screen time with kids, and I've seen that myself. My wife and I had these conversations before we had kids, like screen time and all that kind of stuff, and you can't avoid it. But you can, still use that as an opportunity to interact as opposed to distract. And I'm just wondering, like, I'm not wondering, I'm just expressing out loud, like, how sad I feel for the like just sitting here and talking to you face to face and seeing a manifestation of these things that I noticed. Because my primary career was as a youth minister to millennials. That was the main generation that I worked with when I was doing that. And I don't know. You really have a point, but I don't know what direction I'm headed. But I'm just wondering, like, I feel like we're grasping at these things. Well, there's this to hope for, and there's this to hope for, and maybe learning to just sit with that hopelessness with you for a minute before saying this is what's good about you and this is what your generation can do to change the world. Because I mean, no doubt you're changing the world, and unfortunately we put you in a position where you have to, because if you don't, then things stay the same, and that sucks.
Yeah, I think a really good song to recommend to anyone that's older than Gen Z and Gen Z too is Making Do by Lake Street Dive. It's totally just, I think they're like maybe young Xers, old millennials, but they wrote this song about what Gen Z is going through from their perspective. And it's like, they totally do it. They totally like hold the hopelessness, and in a really, intense way. It's a really good song. So you should all listen to it.
You're making me think of a story in the Bible.
Okay.
Such a Gen Xer.
That's a punchline.
Yeah, the hopelessness. Like, I think holding the hopelessness, I mean, I shouldn't throw boomers under the bus because, right as soon as we say, okay, boomer, it's going to be, okay, Xer, it's coming. And it'll be earned. It'll be an earned, okay, Xer.
We won't care though.
Well, that'll be on us because we should have cared a lot more all along and we wouldn't be where we are.
Okay.
But it's the story of Jonah and Nineveh and how like he doesn't want to go, right? And God's like, I'm going to destroy that place because they messed up so bad. They're not bringing up their young people, right? They've totally screwed up. So you got to go tell them that they've screwed up. And so Jonah's like, all right, I'll tell him. Finally, after being spit out by the whale, he's like, I'll go tell him. And he tells him. And then he's like, the only good thing about coming here is I get to watch the city burn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Totally.
And so like he was like so ready to just be like, see what happens.
Under his tree.
Right? Sit under his tree and sit in the hopelessness. But what happens when a whole community sits in this hopelessness together? Things turn.
Yeah.
They turned. And then they ended up finding out afterwards what thriving really looks like, maybe. And I wonder if there's some lessons in that ancient story for this moment, because you're not the youngest generation on the planet anymore. There are younger ones coming up after you. And so at some point, we have to be able to, and we're all going to be alive to see these younger ones come up, all of us who are sitting here at this table. We have to be able to really like sit with you and see the future in your eyes, and then create that danger space to cover and shelter and hold the younger ones with you, hold these younger ones that are coming up after you, so that we can turn from the hopelessness to a future with hope.
Yeah, and we're going to be parents soon too.
Yeah.
I mean, some of us already are, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that whole thing. Yeah.
Leave it to Bonnie to round this off with the Bible.
Well, I mean, I could have this conversation all day and then just move in waves of hope and hopelessness.
Yeah.
So Selah, any final words? I want to kind of give you the space to, maybe this is a good question to end on, and just for you, and we'll shut our mouth. How can us and older generations hold space with you?
Yeah. Well, part of me, honestly, is, if I'm like speaking from the pain that I think Gen Z collectively experience, part of me is a little upset by that question, because it's like, why don't you guys just figure it out on your own? Like, we have so much stuff that we're trying to do, like, especially right now, like with the pandemic. And it's like, yeah, like a lot of people my age that I know, and me including myself, just like missed out on so many high school moments, and now we're entering the real world, and it's just like, I don't have time to tell you what you need to do. But I think that what's most important is to just, if you care about your kids and the kids in your life, then show them, and don't just like go along with what our culture is doing and how they're treating our kids. And maybe just tell them, like, literally, like, explicitly just say, like, I don't think that you are only a for-profit advertisement bag of organs. Like, just say that. Like, just say, I think there's a lot more to you than that. Because then they'll be like, oh my God, thank you. Like, and just literally like that kind of thing. What kept coming to mind in the conversation was this episode of Rick and Morty, which is a great show. But
It is a great show.
One of the episodes is like Rick, who's like really old. He like goes into this teenager body that he creates. It's like a science. Anyways, the part is like, he's this teenager and he's like writing all these songs, and all the songs are like I'm begging for help. Like, I need help right now. And then people are like, oh, it sounds like, are you okay? And he's like, oh, no, I'm fine. Like, I'm just living my life. I think that that's totally what Gen Z is doing. And they're using social media to do that. And I think that what older people can do is to just, acknowledge that internally and also to the kids in your life and go from there.
Well, I think so much of what was just, and this is probably a whole other episode on its own, but so much of what's been described is really a failure of parenting. We as adults should be like, you know what, kids, we got this. Go out and play. Go find some sticks, dig up some earthworms, go play. We're not
given that permission to be a kid, and you kind of need that. You need structure. And we don't really have it.
Engagement, structure, developmentally appropriate, presence, accountability.
Yes.
Chores, you contribute, but not the weight of the world and securing the future from, damnation. That's no.
Not in the job description.
No, not when you're 18.
Yeah.
And that means then that you say, no, you can't do that. You're not, this is too much for you to handle right now.
Totally.
So I'm taking that out of your hands.
Yeah. It's definitely not doing whatever they want you to do.
Right.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I just got a lot going in my head. I love that first part of your answer. So shut up and figure it out. I like it.
Yeah.
Well, for those of you listening, let us know what you think. If you would like to add your voice to this particular conversation, you can comment in the show notes at irenicast.com/193. In the show notes, you'll find relevant links and a complete list of all the ways to add your voice to this conversation. That's irenicast.com/193. And also, don't forget, in the show notes, we will put a link to Selah's podcast. I'm sure she has some great episodes to come, and she's already had some good episodes as well. And if you haven't already, please consider joining our email list. Joining our email list is the best way to keep up to date on all things Irenicast. So on the other side of the music, we are going to be quizzed by Selah on some current slang, and we'll separate the wheat from the the chaff, so to speak, in terms of how relevant we are paying attention to the culture. So look forward to that on the other side of the music. We are on the other side of the music. Selah, the floor is yours. School us in some modern terminology.
Okay, so this one I'm going to start out pretty easy. What does yeet mean? I will spell it, and then I can also pronounce it in the way that it's usually pronounced, which is very deep. It's like yeet, like that. That's how it's usually said.
Yeet is yeah, right? It's I hear in my head, it's yeet, yeet.
I'm not going to answer until everyone else says something.
Whoop whoop. Is that
it's like a what?
Okay.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
I mean, my first instinct was something like that too, just kind of like a yes, like a cheer or something.
My only context is that my kids have been saying this one in particular, and I have a sense that they're not using it right because they're 8, and I think they're just picking it up. But they use it in the context of like an exuberance, like a not a but just more of like a. Well, they say it when they throw things at me. So I mean, there's some sort of physicality to it, like a grunt when you throw something real hard. I'm gonna go with that. I don't know if that's a thing.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to go?
You got to guess, Rajiv. You can't just say, I don't know.
I thought you were going to be super good at this.
Oh.
That's why you were like, oh, I'm going to be so good.
I know. I mean, it's like I'm starting to realize the failure of parenting is translating into some of the slang too. Like yeet.
Oh my God.
I don't know. I seriously don't know. To me, it just sounds like, I don't know, just a grunt.
You're all wrong except Jeff. Jeff is right.
Yes.
It's a verb that's used when you throw something. So it started with Started when I was in middle school, and when people would throw like little pieces of paper into the trash can, they would say yeet. And then now it's like a verb where you could say like I yeeted myself, which is just like you kind of freak out for a second. Or like I yeeted this jacket. It means you threw it across the room.
So freaking out and getting thrown has the same word.
Well, yeah, it's like
You
if you
throw
yeet yourself,
right?
then it's like a figurative, like,
like
you're just throwing yourself
across the room.
Yeah. Yep, that's what it means.
Good.
So-
I'm glad to know that. Thank you, Selah.
Yes, you're welcome. Let's move on to
Please, let's.
simp. SIMP.
Isn't that just short for simple?
No.
I know, submissive. So like you're a simp. So you're, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a nice way to put it, but like you, almost like a fanboy or another boy that starts with an F. Like you're just kind of you're submitting to you're you're the ultimate fan of someone, and you're always going to, not even necessarily someone, but anyway, you're just submissive. That's the best way I can describe it.
What Jeff said.
What Casey said. But when you first said, I was like a simpleton, somebody that can't think for themselves.
My understanding is that it's less to do with how smart you are, but it's how like, you're passive.
Yeah,
You allow
that
yourself
was
to
the
be
word I
walked
was
over.
thinking, is passive.
Yeah, simpleton.
That's kind of it.
Hold on, Bonnie hasn't guessed. Has
Yes,
she?
she did.
Oh,
I
you
said
did?
simple. I'm just gonna
Oh,
go
you said
first
simple.
and just like do my best.
I wouldn't really say that's it. I think when I was like making this list, I realized there's a bunch of like sexist slang in Gen Z, and I would say this is a pretty sexist one because it came from like if you're simping over someone, and it came from like a boy simping over a girl, then you're just like valuing them. Like it was kind of like a bro term, and the bros would be like, oh,
Or like sympathetic.
no, I mean, I don't know where it comes from, but it's just like, oh, like you'd rather spend time with your girlfriend than us. So
like the
you're
equivalent of
simping.
when we said we're whipped.
Maybe. I don't know what that means, but
Okay.
Yeah.
You're simping. Say it again, Selah.
like the origin
Like
of
pining over,
yeah. It's just kind of like an intense, like
longing for.
it's just like falling in love, but you're kind of, there's some
Yeah, because I
submissive
hear it's
stuff
like you're
going
a simp. You'll hear Gen Z say, "You're such a simp."
Yeah, we would say whipped. Like,
Would you say
when-
is it a verb or an adjective or a noun?
It's a noun, and it's like I said, it started with like mostly like it being derogatory, and now people will say like, oh, like I'm totally simping over this person, and that's just like I'm just having a little crush, and I'm just I would like, yeah, I would not hang out with
Like
the bros
obsessed
to
with?
go hang out with this person. Yeah, I guess it's like an obsession. Not really though.
I wish this was a visual medium because I want pictures of Rajiv's curmudgeon faces. Like, whatever. Stupid word.
No, I mean, it's like if there was like an arc, like it came from somewhere.
It sure.
And
I'm
that's
sure
like
it
an
did.
abbreviation.
It always does, but
That's
we
why I
don't
look it up
always
on
know
Urban
the
Dictionary.
origin.
Sympathetic,
Urban Dictionary
Yeah.
has
maybe.
all the
I don't know.
answers.
Oh yeah.
Urban Dictionary. Yeah. Okay.
It comes
Maybe
from
that's
somewhere.
the bonus round
From a rap song.
Yeah.
from a
So
rap song.
Wow.
Blame the music.
It's
okay. The next one is I just wrote main character, but I guess it's also called main character syndrome.
an unreasonable, overinflated sense of self.
I just think it's like maybe telling, main character syndrome is just being like telling your story, like from like you've got to be the main character, and you notice that in other people, like, oh, that person's
Okay.
I was just gonna
It's
say.
so
I was just
dumb.
gonna say whiteness. That's what it feels
Mm.
like to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I just real quick.
Yeah.
So it's actually like that's how it's said. Like if I was gonna say in a sentence, I would actually say
I've heard,
you're such a main character.
I'll give it an example. I've heard actually someone put it on my Instagram.
Is it
from
used
when I was in
correctly?
Rome. Yeah. I posted this thing from when I was in Rome, and they said main character moment right here.
So my guess then it would be like a social media thing, like a certain pose, like the superhero pose, like the triumphant, like he, look at me, I'm thriving, kind of like that kind of thing.
Okay. Did everyone go?
Yes.
Okay. So, no, it's not any of those things. It's like it actually started with a trend on TikTok, I think, where people were saying like I'm a main character and everyone else is just like a secondary character in the movie of my life.
Dude, that's what I said.
Yeah.
I said an unreasonable, overinflated sense of self.
Rajiv said that.
But it's not really what it is. It's just
That's
like
what you just described.
it's different than that.
I think I hear the difference.
I don't. Sorry. I'm going to be the adult in the room.
Yo, that's being the bully in the room.
Oh my God.
I think it should be said. I don't think we've said this in the episode, but Rajiv and Selah, they're related. Rajiv is Selah's uncle, so I just it's in case some of you.
And this
feel
family,
like...
by the way, is one of the most competitive families I have ever known. And so
we have a history of back and forth banter.
Yeah. Well, to each their own, I guess.
I guess.
The next one is
Hashtag.
Can we
but-
make that a poll somewhere?
But you don't think that could be a healthy attitude to have,
it's
Rajiv?
a healthy
like,
thing. It's
like,
not
I'm
like
the main
it's not
character.
like they're not like saying
Oh,
like,
yeah,
oh,
of
I'm
course.
so blah blah blah, and that's why she said it's like a
I
main
see.
character.
So,
So
yeah.
my connotation was negative.
But
And this is the slang is meant in a positive.
like way to live your
affirming
best
way.
life, right?
Yeah,
Way to
totally.
live your best life. I'm
And
all,
it
I'm all
can't-
about
it
that.
could be
That's an
unhealthy,
important
but-
distinction.
I mean, like the example I gave, she was just like, oh, you're just living your best life, or you're like, this is like what someone in a movie would do. A main character in a movie would go to Rome. So I'm gonna say like you're having a main character moment right now.
I get all that.
Oh, really?
Thanks.
Okay.
But
Just
yeah,
making sure.
I the nuance as far as the connotation, that is true. Mine was negative.
Rajiv conceding. Put this in the books.
I'm not conceding. It's just a fact. I had a negative connotation.
Okay. The next one is a trend that's on TikTok, and I want you guys to tell me what you think it is. Like what entails, like what's the trend about? It's called devious licks. And it's not sexual.
Don't ask these people. Selah, I'm so glad you're here. Usually it's just
Listen
me.
to the segment from a previous episode on bad advice column. This fits right in there.
Oh my God.
Did you say devious licks?
Yep.
That means like a really good song.
Nope.
Like wicked good
Devious
song.
licks.
That
It's a
guitar lick
trend.
was amazing.
It's a-
oh.
It's a trend.
Oh, just licking strange things? Stranger licks.
I'm
But
still
There's the
laughing
next
about last.
there's the next TikTok trend, stranger licks.
Oh my God. You sound dumb.
Comes naturally.
Oh God. Devious licks. I have no idea. Look, your aunt is right. Nothing I say will be appropriate. So we'll just move on.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know.
I know this one. I think
Come on,
Oh,
Jeff.
okay.
God.
it's a theft. So like in schools there'll be devious licks. So they'll take something important like a paper towel roll or dispenser or the soap. This has happened at my kid's school. And then like I know that on TikTok there was like a list of what they were going to do each month to like be devious, and one of them was actually assault on teacher. And I don't know how many of that actually happened, but yeah. So they steal something and do something devious. That's I'm pretty sure I'm right, but we'll see.
Yeah, and you're right. And I didn't even know about this until Luke Zimmerman, who was the first guest on my podcast, his partner was talking to me, and they go on TikTok all the time, and they were just talking about at youth group, these kids were like, oh yeah, like they just stole like a whole bathroom stall from my school. Like it's getting really crazy, and people are stealing like traffic lights and stuff. So it's totally just like they'll be like, who wants to go on a devious lick with me? And then they'll record themselves like stealing something.
So am I hearing it? It's devious
lick.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Which, I mean, it's kind of going back to our conversation, the administrators, at least in my school context that I'm aware of with my kids, is that they're handling this poorly. So like one of the licks that happened at my kids' school was the soap. So they don't even provide soap for them anymore. They have to take the soap with them. So, and then in some schools, I've read that they're just taking out the stalls altogether. So now like kids like that are at school, like no privacy when they use the restroom. Like the way the administration is handling it is basically like, well, we don't want anything taken, so we're going to take it away first, which is the dumbest, stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Makes me want to steal things.
Spoken like
stealing
an
like toilet paper and soap, I can see that happening. How do you steal a whole stall and get away with that?
People, they also steal toilets. That's a thing. Like, actually, that was what the youth group people were saying. They were like, yeah, they keep stealing toilets.
Well, I mean, if a generation can do that and get away with it, maybe they are the key to the future.
They're definitely not millennials.
Hey, they're bringing a screwdriver to take a toilet off and not a gun.
Yeah.
I'm like, go for it. You know?
Totally.
Yeah.
I couldn't dismantle a toilet, so good on you there. Like, you know, teach me.
Especially the commercial kind where it's like attached right to the pipe.
But then taking pictures of yourself doing it and posting it, isn't that what makes it the devious lick?
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
That's the devious lick factor.
Yeah,
So
then
Don't you just hand that to the cops?
You could.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they're overwhelmed. Like they know that nothing's going to happen unless it goes viral.
And they probably just
They're
post
fine.
it and then it goes away, like on something where it's
Oh, like Snapchat or whatever that thing is.
I like this game.
Yeah, you're winning.
Yeah, you're winning. Look, I thought
It's
I was
making
hip
me.
with
It's
that.
like what's going on with Jeff over there?
I know. Well, he has kids.
has
that
kids.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Is
True.
that the,
And I do watch TikTok
key.
a lot.
I watch
like
one,
I'm
yeah.
very
I don't have TikTok.
curious
so-
about generations coming up. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I try to too, at least, but that's all. I just look at it analytically. Like I'm just like, okay, so what's going on here? But I'm not on it enough to know all these things. That's why I asked Selah.
All right. Well, Selah, thank you so much for coming on the show. Please don't forget to check out her podcast, The Arriving, link in the show notes. If you're searching for it in your podcast app, no space between the and arriving. Make sure you find it. It's really, really well done. So that'll do it for us. And if you enjoy Irenicast and you would like to join the work that we are doing, please consider donating to our PayPal link at irenicast.com/PayPal. We're committed to keeping the show for free for listeners, but there are costs involved and your financial support helps. That's irenicast.com/PayPal. Irenicast is also a nonprofit organization, so your donations are tax deductible. You can also support the show by simply making sure you follow on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. And if the platform allows it, please leave a rating and or review. So for this week, I'm Jeff.
I'm Bonnie.
I'm Casey.
And this is Rajiv.
Oh, and this is Selah.
Thanks for joining the conversation.